So people are still reeling in shock from the mass shooting that happened in Las Vegas on Sunday night. And Venerable Children, who is traveling now, sent us an email saying that we should address this in our BBC talks. So I will do my best. For the benefit of the guests here who don't have access to the internet, I'll give a very short summary of what happened and then touch on resources that I found very helpful to turn to during this time. So there was a gunman on the 32nd floor of a hotel who shot at 22,000 people attending a country music concert before he killed himself, and that has left 59 people dead and 527 injured. And at least 23 firearms were found in his hotel room, including assault rifles. So the police are piecing together a profile of the shooter. It turns out he was a 64-year-old white man with no history of mental illness. Doesn't seem to have any political or religious affiliation. They just know he was a multi-millionaire gambler and a speculator who lived alone in a retirement community in Florida. And he had a lived-in girlfriend who was out of the country during this time. And apparently a week ago, he had wired money to her home in the Philippines. So, just signs that he had been planning something. But till now, nobody knows what the motive is, which I think is quite distressing to people who want some kind of answer that way. So after reading this initial news coverage yesterday, I watched my mind starting to get despondent, and I thought, okay, it's time to stop reading the news. And I turned to a section on tuptanchildren.org, Venerable's website, and it's a section called Fear and Violence in America. That we have this section on the website is kind of sad, actually, but also very necessary because in it, since 2012, she's been giving talks and sharing articles and comments from students on this issue of violent acts that occur in America and how to work with our minds around that. And in looking through that section, I found an article by John Owen, who is now Venerable Losang Denye, a monk in Dharamsala, where he was grieving the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. And I'd just like to read that to you and Venerable's advice, because that helped my mind to calm down. So John Owen says, "Today I recall the words of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Violence does not accord with our basic human nature, which may lead you to wonder why all sorts of violence become news while compassionate acts seldom do. The reason is that violence is shocking and not in conformity with our basic human nature, whereas we take compassionate acts for granted because they are closer to our nature." Then John goes on to say, "Now for an empathy chat with myself, non-violent communication style. Are you feeling sad? Do you need some empathy? Yes, I'm sad. I'm needing hope and harmony. I'm angry because I need sincerity and integrity. And I'm feeling guilty because I need to contribute to make our world a place where no one could sink to this. I'm ashamed because I need to stop fueling the habits that contribute to people feeling disconnected and angry. I'm embarrassed and concerned because when I hear of tragedy, I don't react with a natural heartfelt response, but I feel a need to fabricate some feeling of concern. I'm confused because I need understanding of the choked giggles and diverted gazes and deeply weathered sustained gazes and the, oh, my so-and-so lives such and such distance from this place, and the why, how, what's become of the world. And I'm disappointed in myself because I want my feelings to have some reason behind them, but I think these ones are utter nonsense. And I see that we're all trying so hard, but we're nincompoops. I'm frustrated when I hear about evil because I need meaningful words that heal, not abstractions that superficially console. I'm sick of hearing about national tragedies and then having my first reaction be, what about all the people we're killing constantly? What about the 23 million people killed in the 44 wars currently taking place in the world? What kind of message are we sending ourselves when we kill someone and then dance in the streets? What do we expect? I need acceptance. I need a capacity to feel for all these 23 million, the 28, the 20, even the one who's guilty. I need love for all of them and all of us. I'm heartbroken and I'm needing empathy. And I feel empathy coming from the whole world and going out to the whole world. And I'm grateful and touched because this fuels my need for beauty and togetherness. But I'm scared because I want compassion to be the basis of human interaction, and I can only weep thinking how this won't last. Today I have a broken heart, broken but fused together with a billion other broken hearts, whirling a stunning display of love into perpetual orbit around our sunken heads. This open, sensitive, courageous heart. I'll be looking around today with a keen eye to see about the truth of the Dalai Lama's statement that compassion is our basic human nature. And then here's Venerable's response. She says, John, thank you for your honest sharing of your feelings. When tragedies happen, it's natural to have a tumbling flow of changing emotions, some which feel right, others which we don't like. Accept these emotions as arising in your mind. Then slowly look at them more closely. Especially look at the thoughts lying behind the emotions, the thoughts about how the world should be, expectations of ourselves and others, and judgments about how we should feel. Be careful of the shoulds and expectations. They distance us from the reality of the moment and get us stuck in our heads. Instead, get in touch with your heart. The sorrow for, in this case, Sandy Hook, for the children, the teachers, the killer, the country, our human predicament, the universality of suffering in all realms of cyclic existence. From this sorrow, let the determination to be free from suffering arise. Let compassion for yourself and others arise. Cultivate a bodhisattva's long-term view that knows all sentient beings can attain liberation and awakening, but it's going to take a while for each one of us to create the multitude of causes that bring it about. Accept the reality that patience and fortitude are required, and let yourself experience the joy, knowing that it's possible for each sentient being to attain full awakening, because each one has the Buddha nature. The basic nature of the mind is pure, and the defilements have not entered into the nature of the mind. Strengthen your own resolve to practice the path and to benefit others here and now, even in simple ways. So I found this to be balm for my mind, because for sure I had all these emotions coming up, and to read the way John articulated them, I was like, oh yeah, I'm not alone, for sure no. And I think just making space for ourselves to accept what arises, that's the first step Venerable points to. Yeah, not to have, or even if you have judgments about it, to watch those arise, and that's just your experience. There's no right or wrong way to respond. I was reminded of how when I met with Lachelle in Portland, there was one day, she's our nonviolent communication trainer for the community, and she invited me for dinner, and she doesn't know I don't take dinner. So I show up and I say, oh, I can't eat anything, but I just want to see you. And she went, oh. And she looked really sad, and she just closed her eyes and stood there for a while. And immediately I wanted to fix the situation. I said, hey, don't worry about it. I'm okay with this. And then she said, no, I just need to let this move through me. And she just stood there and let her sadness move through her. And then she was okay, and then we connected. But I think in that moment where we jump in to rescue, or like even with ourselves, like, oh, you shouldn't feel that. Or with a friend, I saw that happen a few times yesterday, like, oh, you're sad, just relax. You're shutting down that process, Like, it's okay, we have space to just feel whatever we're feeling and whatever comes up. Because it's impermanent and it will pass. Yeah. So that's just the first step. Give yourself that space to feel whatever's coming up. And then, Venerable says, we can start to look at these emotions more closely. It becomes part of our analytical meditation, right? Like she says, to start looking at what are the thoughts behind these emotions. Are we expecting something that's realistic, or are we actually hanging on to some kind of illusory expectations about what our world is supposed to be, who we're supposed to be, what sentient beings are supposed to be? So she also gave 3 really excellent talks in that section, Fear and Violence in America, about the feelings that come up for people, especially after mass shootings, and how to handle them. So she broke it down into 4 key emotions that come up for us. The first being sadness, anger, fear, and sometimes apathy. So I'll just touch on these briefly, and the antidotes that she brought up too that we can keep in mind. So she said, sadness is a very natural and appropriate response. And for her, it was seeing the uncontrolled minds of sentient beings. From a Dharma perspective, that's the root cause of all this suffering, right? Because of the ignorance and the anger and the afflictions that come up. This person is overwhelmed and does something incredibly horrific. And she said, that's an opportunity for us too to open up to how we have uncontrolled minds. So that's an uncomfortable truth, but we can see that if we don't work to reduce our own violent thoughts, to work with our own afflictions, we could very well do the same thing. Maybe not in this life, but who knows, in future lives. And she said, when we reflect like that, we can strengthen our resolve to practice the Dharma, especially to keep good ethical conduct. And that's something I came back to a lot yesterday, in times when my mind started to feel distress. I thought, one thing I can actively do is I keep a precept not to kill. Yeah, imagine if this person had a precept not to kill. When I first took the precept not to kill, I thought, oh, we are going to protect life, not just for this life. Like, think of all the people you may have killed all the way to Buddhahood. If you have this strong resolve and you renew it life after life, you're protecting innumerable lives, right, by taking a precept not to kill. So it's not a small thing. It's something to really rejoice in and to renew day after day and life after life. And she said sometimes, our sadness might be very brief and it goes to anger quite quickly. Yeah, the mind's distressed, a terrible thing has happened, we're looking for someone to blame. And she listed, how you might blame any of the parties involved, the NRA, the government, the perpetrator, so forth. And she said, again, something that we can look at is how we too have done the same in the past. Yeah, if we're angry with officials who care more about being re-elected than about the value of human life, well, guess what? We've done the same ourselves. And so to really purify those actions, those states of mind, and again to resolve not to repeat those actions. And of course, when we're angry, we can, aside from calming the mind so that we're not acting out of anger, we can shift that to compassion and take civic action. I think so Venerable encourage people to, sign petitions, write your representatives, call. I see you can tweet your representatives these days as well. Whatever it takes to show that there is, just speak up, basically, about what you believe in. One of our friends at the UU emailed us and said how it helped him to look up nonprofits that were working for gun reform laws. And so he found one called the Coalition Against Gun Violence. And reading what they were doing, he believed in what they were working towards, and he made a contribution to their cause. And he felt that was helpful for his mind, like a small action he could take, moving in the right direction. And for sure, all of us can keep doing the taking and giving meditation for all the victims and their families who are grieving. And I think the most important thing is not to shut down, to keep our hearts open to caring for others, because that's what can happen. And that came up quite strongly yesterday at the Unitarian Universalist Church. People saying, oh wow, one tragedy after another, I feel so overwhelmed. Like, what is the country coming to? So that was the first wave of responses that came up. We made the space to hear them. And what was so beautiful was to watch the room shift, applying the antidotes together, where two people in the audience said, well, that's one way of looking at the situation, but also positive things have happened. And two of the participants in the group pointed out that one powerful antidote to fear, to the mind that's blowing the situation out of proportion, is to step back and see, hey, were there kind people working to help others? Yes. Yeah, so people listed examples that during this tragedy in Las Vegas, so many anonymous people helped others, shielded them with their bodies to save lives. There was apparently a man with military training who was started to put his training into action to get people out of the danger zones. A nurse went back to various sites to rescue people. And people were stopping their trucks to help people to get to the hospital. All the first responders who went in. And apparently there are 5-hour-long lines to donate blood. I think Ken told us the earliest you can get into one of these blood donation sites now is Thursday. Yeah, so one person created an incredible amount of suffering, and also now thousands of people are coming together to help each other, to preserve life, with a totally different motivation. So Venerable said, too, that is one way to help ourselves from falling into apathy, right, which can happen if we're overwhelmed and feeling hopeless, is to repeatedly see the kindness of others, which comes through. Our basic nature is compassion. And so through getting in touch with our heart, we can start to turn this into the 3 principal aspects of the path, which is what she touched on as well in one of her talks, that we get a very sobering view that this is the nature of cyclic existence. We are all in grave danger. Lama Zopa Rinpoche says this all the time, and you're like, yeah. Now it's like, we are in grave danger. You really don't know when your life could end, and you wind up, all you have is your karma carrying to the next life. So it generates that determination for us to be free from suffering and its causes, and to see that if we become a Buddha, we can be free of this suffering and help others. Right? And as Venerable pointed out in what she responded to John, if we create the cause, the results will come. So that strengthens our resolve to practice. She didn't really touch on this thing about emptiness, but one way we can also look at the situation in our meditation is to see that it's a dependent arising. Yeah, not to misunderstand that, oh, it's empty, so it didn't happen. Totally not that case. But to see, wow, a situation like this, so many complex causes and conditions have to come together. Especially as people are struggling to understand, like, what's the motive? What could have prompted this? Well, it's not just one man. Yeah, so many things had to come together for this to happen. And I haven't quite wrapped my head around it, but I want to share a story of one of my students that I know from about 10 years ago. And I often think about it when news of shootings happen here in the US. Yeah, and maybe the title of the story is, What Does It Take to Stop a Shooting? So about 10 years ago, just before I left the public school I was teaching in, it was a low-income neighborhood, rough school. Most of our energy was put into taking care of kids who were in gangs and making sure they were not getting in trouble with the law. One day, the principal told the staff that a student had written an email detailing all the people he intended to kill in the school. And thankfully, the teacher had quickly sent it along to the school authorities, who stepped in and got him psychiatric help. And when I found out who it was, I was not surprised. I had taught this student for about 2.5 years. And myself and another teacher, all of us knew he was troubled, and we were all involved in counseling him. The first time I met the student, I recall he slammed the table to the ground and walked to the front and banged his head on the blackboard and wouldn't stop. And I was like, okay, he's in some distress. I always got the help of the school counselor. Yeah, he wrote, told me many times he wanted to kill himself, and So we were all actively monitoring and counseling as we could. And we knew there were problems at home, and I knew he played a lot of violent video games. But at the same time, he was a student leader, had very good grades. Very bright, very precocious boy. So yeah, in the big scheme of the school and the many gangs and all that, he seemed like a small problem. Yeah, people were not alerted till he wrote this letter, which was basically a cry for help. Now, 5 years later, I run into this boy. Yeah, I had left the school. I was watching a play at the theater, and I saw this boy talking to a group of friends, and he was laughing and looking very happy. So I was like, hey, what are you doing here at the theater? And we caught up, and I found out that he got good psychiatric help. The school actually helped him with financial support to pay for medication. He was diagnosed with clinical depression, and he said the medication was very helpful for helping him get his emotions under control. He graduated and went to a new school, found friends there, and he joined some kind of character building program, and there was a mentor who was so important, who kept in touch with him over the years and really helped him to turn his life around. And now he was happy, well-adjusted. I was just amazed, to see that difference and how that's what it takes to turn someone's life around. So many people connecting and helping. And I really shudder to think what would have happened if he had access to a gun back then. Yeah. Also, he is Muslim, so just imagine what would have happened, if nobody had intervened, if he had access to a gun and just came to school, and that would have been the end of that. Yeah. So really, it's many complex causes and conditions, and I think all of us should not discount the everyday acts of kindness we engage in. Just reaching out to someone, being a friend. I think that can make a world of difference, and prevent acts of violence at all levels in society.
Yeah, I like how you pointed out that this is a dependent arising, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. Why would somebody with no history of mental illness, I'm kind of assuming based on what you said, but there's no way to think that this man would suddenly go berserk unless you understand the forces that are operating within the greater society, like especially in the political climate, all this violent, angry, aggressive rhetoric, and the gun laws and the gun lobbyists, and it's just a psychologist might be puzzled if they say, oh, if they look just at the individual, but we are part of a larger society, and what other people are doing influences us, and vice versa. What we do influences other people. So it's important to remember that we have a responsibility to not promote very harmful, aggressive, violent ideas within the broader public, or within politics, or within the media. I mean, to me, this story is not surprising. Actually, given the leadership in this country at the moment, I only expect things like this to increase. But yeah, I just appreciate the value of, the dependent arising and interdependence to explain situations like this, which otherwise might be leaving a lot of people scratching their heads.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, because it's a dependent arising, Venerable actually wrote in her email, it's important to pray to keep all the victims and their loved ones in our minds, but we also have to take action. Yeah, whatever that form, that social action looks like for you, whether it's direct civic engagement or, like you said, working against the forces of violence in the long term and cultivating a good heart ourselves are all viable forms of action. Yeah.